In the late 80s and early 90s, Turtle Mania swept across the media landscape like a radical whirlwind from another dimension. Also known as Turtle Power, stemming from the popularity of the 1987 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon, the teens in green made their way from stewards of the sewers to teenage media titans. This cartoon brought a fresh and fun kid-friendly take on the comics characters created by Eastman and Laird in 1984, which featured four young brothers battling in black and white against a beautiful and gritty New York City, discovering the origins of how they came to be and taking on Oroku Saki, aka the Shredder, and his ninja clan the Foot for the very first time. The artwork in that original graphic novel is gorgeous and the story immediately captivating. The comic has an underground feel to it and features a much more serious and gripping tone than one might expect, having only known the Turtles from their animated format. Its combination of Eastern and Western storytelling mixed with 80s radioactive weirdness is a strange mutation indeed, and it just works. Everything emerges fully formed and is immediately iconic. All of this finding its way from a late-night sketch and shared amusement from such a ridiculous concept, inspired by the works of Frank Miller and tied to the mythos of Daredevil. The world of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was born, and soon, everyone would take notice. With the popularity of the TMNT growing, a new wave would wash over Saturday mornings as the 1987 cartoon brought the concept, now reimagined as a more family-friendly endeavor, into the homes of an entire generation.
Well.
This iteration, while chock full of 80s and 90s tubular tude, still brought in the core elements of the Turtles' world building and was a major milestone in TMNT history. Mixed with a hypnotically catchy theme song and more outrageous Saturday morning direction, it's probably the era looked most fondly upon, as it was a lot of people's first introduction to the pizza-obsessed Teenage Turtles. And with the explosion of popularity that followed, it's no wonder that toys, movies, and everything you could slap a turtle on would begin to take hold across the airwaves. TMNT became so well known, to put it into perspective, this franchise has now spawned 5 TV shows, 6 major motion pictures, a stage show, and a lot of weird things in between.
The holes with pepperoni.
And of course, with all of this came the games. With Shredder's Revenge in our hands and the Cowabunga Collection incoming, I want to take a look at the journey that got us from one to the other. Turtles games for a time were as essential to the platforms they were developed for, just as much so as Mario and Sonic, I would say. And all of the games on this list still hold up for me today. The Cowabunga Collection will be covered with some notable games from the 2000s as well. All of this leading up to Shredder's Revenge and a CRT, because sometimes to admire what's present, you have to mix in a little bit of the past. So, let's get back to where it all began. If the late 80s were a pizza, its perfect combination of ingredients would be a fresh marketable idea as the dough, a cheesy cartoon show as well, the cheese, and a fistful of toys, movies, and video games as the toppings. Arcades were all the rage, and the original NES was bringing the gaming experience into the living room. This was a time when Konami was king, and the idea of merging turtles and cartridge shells was all but waiting to happen. And in 1989, this finally came to be, and if 4 baby turtles were to be made into video games, Konami was the ooze.
Prehistoric Turtlesaurus.
Released in May of that year under Konami's Ultra Games division, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the NES, aka Fierce Turtle Ninja Legend on the Famicom in Japan, would make its way into homes, and to play this game at the time of release was a dream come true. Notorious for its difficulty now, at the time this was still a revelation. Our favorite characters were finally here on home console, and it looks and feels like a proper Ninja Turtles game. As a first outing, it may seem a bit abstract compared to all that would follow, but the ambition of what they set out to accomplish is honestly impressive. Starting the game from a top-down perspective has an almost RPG-like feel as you make your way into different areas. Once inside an area, the game takes on a side-scrolling action game style as you make your way through hordes of wild enemies, exploring the sewers, and doing your damnedest to stay alive. Also RPG-like is having access to all 4 turtles via the start screen, which can be selected at any time. Utilizing different turtles in different scenarios can be key, as their weapons have different ranges and you could even attack in different directions, all while making these huge ninja jumps and managing platforming throughout the levels. Some might find the jumping a little floaty, but I like it. You can also manage resources as every turtle has their own life bar and can regain health when you come across delicious revitalizing pizza. So switching characters to keep your team's life up can be useful. Pretty impressive stuff for the NES. Combine these mechanics with that classic Konami music and sound, and you'll be having a good time with this one. Until the dam. We don't talk about the dam. All in all, a solid first outing for Team Green. Difficulty aside, this one set the stage for the spell of the shell. Later on that same year, Konami would go on to raise the bar for all TMNT games going forward with its seminal release, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Arcade Game, which to this day is still regarded as one of the most legendary arcade titles of the era, and for some, of all time. As it turns out, mixing Ninja Turtles and beat-em-ups would be a recipe not long forgotten. Everything here is iconic, from sprite and level design to mechanics and music. The set pieces are wonderfully animated with lots of interactive elements and attention to detail that adds a lot to the experience. It was like you were playing the cartoon. This was as close to turtle heaven as you could hope to find for the time. Coming across one of these cabinets in the wild was like finding an actual Ninja Turtle. It felt mythical and larger than life. That being said, while it's still a ton of fun to play today, some of the sound design can be rather shrill and better, in my opinion, games would follow. Your attacks, for example, sometimes feel as they're moving through an enemy as opposed to connecting with them. It lacks some of that perfect keyframe hit detection that would find its way into later beat-em-ups. The difficulty also is a straight-up quarter muncher at times. Still, this is a game that should be played by all, at least for its historic significance in defining an entire generation. Next up, in 1990, Konami's arcade hit would find its way home with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game for the Nintendo Entertainment System. This being a port designed specifically for the NES with redesigned levels, characters, and a really well fleshed out experience overall. It's a version of the game that shares DNA with the arcade original, but translates over on its own merits into 8-bit classic greatness. I honestly have a lot of love for this game since it was the closest thing you could get to the arcade at the time, and being a home console version, I obviously spent a lot more time with it. For me, it almost falls into that Double Dragon Contra category of the home port being more charming than their Big Brother arcade counterparts. TMNT 2 honestly feels like a big step up from Turtles 1 on the NES, and should be commended for how close it actually comes to the arcade. The 8-bit music and again classic Konami sound stylings make this a title that's still a ton of fun to experience today. With action that's fast and fluid, great use of color, and honestly impressive 8-bit turtle pixels, TMNT 2 proves you don't need arcade hardware to have one shell of a good time at home. Following suit in 1991, Konami's Ultra Games set to put turtle power in the palm of your hand with Fall of the Foot Clan for the original Game Boy. This is a title I remember having some experience with, thinking the large sprites and fluid gameplay were very impressive for the time, and I still feel that way revisiting it today. Taking inspiration from Turtles 1 and 2 for the NES, the action is single plain side-scrolling like the first game with more arcade-like simplified attacks and level progression like the latter. The high jumping feels like Turtles 1, utilizing your well-trained ninja agility, and you can use shurikens from a crouch position without having to find a power-up, which is a very cool addition. Enemies attack in Contra-like patterns coming in from all sides, and it keeps you on your toes. Just hearing the classic theme song and Game Boy rendition is reason enough to give this one a try. This was and still is a great way to play Turtles on the go. Next up in 1991, also on the Game Boy, was Back from the Sewers. This game, being a direct sequel, plays more or less like Fall of the Foot, but with redesigned characters and levels taking more inspiration from the arcade game. You no longer have your crouch shuriken attack, but all in all, graphics look good and it's a lot of fun to play. Another solid outing on the Game Boy. After two portable releases, Konami shifted focus back to the NES in 1992 with Turtles 3: The Manhattan Project. This being the third game in the NES trilogy, it stands out as being the only game in the now de facto arcade style introduced as a home console exclusive. It features the same style of play as Turtles 2 for the NES, but with all new levels, story, and no arcade counterpart. This game, while playing mostly like Turtles 2, does introduce some new elements. While pressing down in attack, you can now flip the foot in a manner similar to the original arcade, which you'll find yourself using quite a lot, sending foes flying for a quick takedown or using your reptile to throw projectiles for a great means of ninja crowd control. Presentation-wise, all of the fun and whimsy Konami had been steadily injecting into these games is on display here. Your character has great reactions to the environment, and the Foot Clan puts on an honest-to-God water ballet. You could tell they were having a good time making these games. All that being said, this one can also be a little on the difficult side, something that's probably a lot more manageable when you bring a friend along for the ride.
This is Cowabunga. But the turtles for your 16-bit system are Cowabunga!
Later in September of 1992, being the second year of a new console generation, Konami was now setting their sights on the Super Nintendo. What would follow would be the culmination of all their work up until this point, and the release of one of the greatest games of the 16-bit generation, and for me, one of the best of all time. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Turtles in Time was actually released the previous year in 1991 in arcades, and then ported to the SNES in 1992. Now, I didn't mention the arcade up until this point because for the longest time I didn't know it existed. I'm not sure how I never came across that cabinet, but years later I would discover its existence with MAME and was very surprised and very excited to play it. The arcade plays a lot like a proper follow-up to the original, and if you love that game, there's only more to love here. In moving the game to the SNES, however, they would once again go on to produce a more fleshed out experience with different levels, bosses, rebalanced gameplay, and in my opinion, just a better and more iconic experience overall. TMNT 4 on the SNES is the pinnacle of Turtles gaming and in every way embodies that timeless Konami factor that makes it just as fun to pick up and play today as it was in 1992. Characters look phenomenal and incredibly close to the arcade. The action never lets up with an infectious fluidity fueling every frame. Enemies seem to emerge from everywhere with clever details populating each new set piece. Level design and pacing is perfect with no one area overstaying its welcome. You can even change the color set of your turtles from cartoon to comic, and the options giving all four turtles a distinct skin tone, more resembling the toys of the time. Honestly, I could make an entire video on how phenomenal this game is alone, but there's more to cover, and as we'll see with Shredder's Revenge, I'm not the only one who felt that way.
Cowabunga, dude.
Moving over to the Sega side of things, the Genesis, not to be left out, got its own TMNT game that very same year. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Hyperstone Heist is interesting as it reuses assets from its SNES counterpart, but is more a remix of Turtles in Time with altered story, remixed levels, and a more Genesis-like color palette. While playing exactly like Turtles in Time, the only major difference is the ability to throw enemies at the screen has been removed, and I find it much harder to reliably pull off the grab and smash attack. Still an excellent game, and another I didn't know existed around the time of its release since we were a Nintendo household and late adopters of the Genesis. When I did finally discover it, I was just happy to have more Konami Turtles beat 'em up action. If you had a Sega Genesis back in the day, this was a must-own, and it's still worth playing through today. Rounding out the Game Boy Turtles trilogy in 1993 was Turtles 3: Radical Rescue. Another strong entry in the handheld TMNT lineup, Radical Rescue makes yet another change to character design and seems to be the most well-optimized performance-wise. This being later in the Game Boy lifespan, it's great to see developers get the most out of the hardware. A little less linear in level design, but another solid entry on the portable machine, and a strong bookend to TMNT on the original Game Boy.
Round one. Fight!
Last but not least in the golden age of Turtles games is TMNT Tournament Fighters, released in 1993 and 1994. This time bringing the 16 and 8-bit era of the Turtles and Konami to a close, Tournament Fighters is interesting as every version is unique to the console it was developed for, with releases spanning the original NES, Super Nintendo, and Sega Genesis. Each machine would receive its own unique character lineup, stages, and musical differences. The SNES version being the game I had the most experience with, for example, makes great use of the softer Super Nintendo color palette with solid gameplay and sound. The roster is well-rounded with a more motley mutant crew than other versions, but is also lacking some obvious fan favorites.
Well, that was a crime, you purse-scrubbing pukes.
Stage design is interesting as it looks good but can feel a little odd for a Turtles game, like some of the stages were made for other fighters of the time. A turbo mode a la Street Fighter II can even be selected to speed up gameplay, which is a nice addition, and I recommend turning it up at least one for some turbo turtle combat.
Round one, fight!
Fighters over on the Genesis, however, really stands out for its roster and level design. Most welcome are the additions of classic Turtles companions Casey Jones and April O'Neil, with this inclusion marking the first occasion of both characters being made playable in a TMNT game. Stages also feel more fitting of the Turtles universe, with levels showcasing a wealth of weird. Tournament Fighters on the Genesis plays more like a mutagen-fueled fever dream, which is only a good thing. Lots of classic Sega-era tood help this version stand out against the SNES's more safe approach. Last but not least is the game of the same name over on the NES. This release makes sense as there were still a lot of original entertainment systems in people's homes during the 16-bit generation, yet is very surprising as fighting games on the platform were few and far between. Once again, the 8-bit treatment only adds charm to the overall experience, and considering the limitations, TMNT Tournament Fighters is a triumph on the NES. Color and sound are both great, and honestly, not knowing this version existed for the longest time, it's been a joy to check out here, and it's definitely worth taking a look at. Chock full of Konami ninja magic, you can't go wrong with TMNT Fighters for any system when you want to change up your TMNT game. And with that, the Turtles would take another vacation, maybe to Florida and sit out the next generation entirely, while the Turtles cartoon would last until 1996 before being rebooted in the early 2000s as simply Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And once again, the Turtles would be reborn. Releasing the same year as the new cartoon, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the GameCube was my first taste of new Turtles of the time. Taking on a cel-shaded approach, this game looks phenomenal and really brought the animation experience home in a new way for fans. Honestly, I am a sucker for all things cel-shaded, and when used with the right pairing of elements, the technique really shines. Gameplay-wise, Konami looked to keep things in line with the arcade beat-em-up style the series was known for, but now in a 3D space for the first time. Performance-wise, everything feels incredibly smooth with 60 FPS performance and new ninja moves to battle all the back alley baddies. You now have your regular attack combinations plus a heavy attack maneuver, which is great for breaking up a hostile party. A dash maneuver has also been added, which feels great and adequately ninja-like, plus an uppercut-like attack which can be used to launch projectiles and enemies into the air. Shurikens have also made a return, and the fight mechanics in general feel arcade-like and solid. Sound design is also great with excellent music to keep the action moving and plenty, if not maybe too many, voice clips. This game, also following suit with Turtles in Time and Tournament Fighters, features a fun versus mode as a nice bonus. A number of sequels in this style would follow, and this being the only one I've experienced so far, I'll absolutely be following up on those games soon enough. This title is worth going back to. Check it out.
Yeah, awesome!
Next up on my list, coinciding with the release of the fourth Turtles feature film in 2007, is TMNT for the Game Boy Advance, this time being developed by Ubisoft. Graphically, the presentation looks fantastic in 32-bit with sharp colors and glorious GBA pixel art style. Gameplay is a return to classic side-scrolling brawler action, and they managed to fit in a nice array of attacks into a 2-button format. Beside your normal combination and jumping attacks, you have an upwards attack at your disposal and a launching kick attack, both useful for juggling combos or managing incoming enemies. Weapons and items can be picked up and tossed about, invoking additional mayhem, or you can just reposition your opposition, throwing enemies like in previous entries. One thing that's weird is collecting coins from your fallen adversaries. Is this how ninjas make pizza money? This of course can be used in an upgrade shop for various items. Music is also a standout, being very fitting for the 2007 game. This is one of the best Turtles handheld games in my opinion, and it still looks great played on any screen today, big or small. If you're curious, check this one out. Just one more before Shredder's Revenge I wanted to talk about, and the 7th generation is TMNT Out of the Shadows for the PS3. For whatever reason, I quite like this game. With its more garish approach to design stemming from the Bay-era movies with a mix of the Nickelodeon CGI show airing around the same time, Out of the Shadows can be a bit janky, but also a lot of fun. It's Ninja Turtles on the PlayStation 3 after all. That alone had me curious enough to give this one a try. This being a melding of arcade adventure-style Turtles and Arkham fight mechanics, features your turtle of choice, chaining attacks against multiple enemies with combatants telegraphing attacks, giving your ninja sense a quick chance at an offensive counter. All 4 turtles fight here as you make your way through levels, with each being accessible via the D-pad at any time. Switching your character up mid-fight can be pretty cool, and when your hit level is high enough, you can employ special moves and team maneuvers. Levels are mostly linear, with paths forward having to be lightly explored as you jump across rooftops, back alleys, and of course in the sewers. Gameplay can feel a little clunky with the camera fighting against you more often than you'd like, but when it works and looks pretty cool while doing so. Little details like how the turtle's eyes turn from normal while exploring to the classic pupilless design while doing battle I like. I don't know why, it also looks pretty weird. There's even an arcade mode for a more straightforward approach, but I find the main game more enjoyable and better suited to the mechanics set up here. There were other Turtles games for the PS3 and Xbox 360, but this is the only one I've ever played through. It's weird, but I like weird. Maybe you do too.
Power surge!
And with all of that, we've come full circle. 30 plus years in the making, Shredder's Revenge sought to take us back to those golden years, offering a tribute to some of the greatest beat-em-up games of all time, while offering a true sequel to an era long past but not forgotten. Upon boot, this game wastes no time in laying out its mission statement. This is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles of old. Utilizing the power of current machines and a throwback art style leverages plenty of headroom to deliver a perfect blend of retro action with modern but not too modern visuals. Played here on a CRT, you could honestly mistake this being a lost game from the GameCube generation, and that is only meant as a pure compliment to its presentation. If Turtles in Time had a proper sequel a few generations later, this is exactly in my mind's eye what it would have looked like. You can feel the abundance of love for the source material in every frame of this decades-later follow-up. It's like the ghosts of Konami past took ethereal form and whispered in the ears of Tribute's developers. Following the also excellent Streets of Rage 4, Shredder's Revenge takes something beloved and familiar and adds just enough new and modern to make it feel like a truly worthy addition to the past while giving players a fresh take to sink your teeth into. Gameplay-wise, your character moves a little slower than Turtles in Time, but the tools you're given better reflects the more methodical approach you may find yourself taking to combat here. That's not to say the action isn't fast and frenetic as you would hope for. It's more like there's a thoughtful polish on familiar movesets with classic attacks joyfully making their triumphant return, and new moves offering fresh ways of play. Just unleashing a classic whip-it to foil those foot or winging a hapless soldier into the screen warms my shell in ways I can't even fully explain. New takes on classic music tracks and levels also work perfectly to deliver the Turtles game we've been waiting for. I love the Channel 6 news building finally making an appearance in game form, for instance, but also love revisiting the Technodrome in disrepair, overgrown with wilderness cast to the crags of a forlorn Dimension X. Old adversaries, of course, come into the fray with new bads based in classic Turtles animation and comics making first appearances, and it's all a joy to behold. You can even for the first time play as Master Splinter, April O'Neil, and Casey Jones in a classic Turtles beat-em-up, with oddball old friends making cameos along the way. And that's all I really want to say for now about Shredder's Revenge, as it's something if you were even remotely curious about, you should really experience for yourself. It satisfies longtime fans and would still be a ton of fun for new players alike. So, if you can, warm up a CRT, polish off your Turtles toys, and spend a few hours enjoying what happens when some old-school tribute meets TURTLE power.
You clogged my gun with anchovy!